Yes, welcome to TechMake TV. Today we are joined by Paramount&Archer's Chief Financial Director, Mr. Jeremy Youmans. He's also the chairperson of the Zimbabwe Clothing Manufacturers Association. He holds so many hats. Today he's going to discuss with us the clothing, the cotton to clothing value chain and a whole lot of other stuff to do with how their export has contributed to the Zimbabwean fiscus, and the fact that Paramount&Archer's employs over 2,000 and it remained operational even during the COVID outbreak. Yes, so with the restrictions put in place to contain the global pandemic being removed, how has Paramount coped over the last 2 years? And what are your plans for the next 2 years?
Morning, Ross. Thanks. Yes, the last 2 years have been a challenge for everybody, and obviously there were lots of issues we had to comply with. As we are a major producer of personal protective equipment, PPE, we were granted a license effectively from the Ministry of Industry to carry on operating in the interests of everybody. So during that time, we had managed to keep operating under obviously the very strict controls that had to be enforced to try and curtail the spread of the pandemic. During that time, we have lost a lot of employees, not through death or them, but just people moving around as other challenges took over and made it very hard for them to get to work or to be able to maintain coming to work. So most of those have been removed now, as you say, and we see this as a new era, and it's time for us to rise up as quickly as we can. We would like to get that number of employees back up to about our maximum, about 3,000 employees, as soon as we can. And that is going to take time, it's going to take orders, and obviously we've got to be able to produce the garments to get to that level. So it is a process. We have lost quite a lot of skills and resource that we had over this period, and we need to rebuild those. So we have set up our own training schools, one here in Harare and one in Bulawayo, and we will be working through those to develop the skills we need, but that will take a bit of time. But as soon as those people come out of the schools, we will utilize them. In our training schools, we do pay the people while they're being trained. They're on full pay, as if they were already in the factory. But that is an essential part of our strategy to get the skills. We have also used expatriates who have been working in the clothing industry to ensure that we're using best practice around the world. We've brought in 4, we intend to have a total of 5 expatriates, just advising us on what we could do better and modern ways that are in the rest of the world that we can learn from. They will then pass on that learning down to our managers, and our managers then on down through the whole employment base. So it's a key strategy to keep growing, and as I said, we're determined to do it as quickly as we can and play our full part that we used to in the economy. Everybody's been down, and the quicker we get up, the better a chance we have of surviving in the future.
What then are your biggest challenges in dealing with the economy in light of the pandemic?
Well, with the pandemic mostly gone, obviously the economy in Zimbabwe now it's got ever increasing inflation again. We have a foreign currency shortage and distribution, so we are going to have to deal with that. There is a lot of cost push inflation in this country and a lot of pressure on wages, with the devaluation of the local currency and inflationary pressures to try and maintain that. Now, without our workers, we can't manufacture anything. So it's very important that we find ways to retain those skills here. But when you're paying once a month and the high rate of movement we have in the economic indicators, it's a very difficult task. And we understand that, so we do provide extra commodities to our employees every month. We make available meals for them, that they can have a substantial meal here, and extra allowances, particularly rewarding skills, and a very good productivity bonus scheme, so that where we get that international level productivity and quality, that our workers must share in the extra benefit we get from that. On the foreign currency issue, there are obviously, as an exporter, the current policies, we surrender 40% of the foreign currency we earn, and on local US dollar sales, 20%. Now there is an ability also to obviously to go to auction and buy foreign currency, but you don't always get allocated what you needed, and then there is the issue of how long it gives to get paid, with a backlog of about 3 months at the moment to get paid on the money that you've already paid for. So cash flows, and particularly in foreign currency, are a major challenge for business in sourcing raw material. One of the big impacts in the pandemic has been the logistics around the world have been dramatically restricted, and therefore our lead times of procurement are much longer. So when you couple that with a shortage of foreign currency, or an inability to receive the foreign currency on time, and then pay your creditors when you've already got a protracted cycle, it puts a huge pressure on your cash flow resources. So we are fairly well stocked up. We always have maintained a high level of stocks to protect against certain things, but this is a challenge going forward to maintain that. We also need to move forward with the times and turn ourselves more to the appeal of our international market. And in doing that, we want to drive a lot of sustainability practices and improving our corporate social responsibility, and certainly the environmental impact with recycling. We're looking at solar energy to power the factories, both here in Harare and Bulawayo, recycling our water that can be reused again, and also recycling our waste from the production processes. Our key strategies we want to develop to then be able to market ourselves to customers who are demanding that sort of compliance and environmental conditioning for them to be able to buy from us.
I like that talking point. You actually won an award, which was from the French, to do with environment. The contribution as Paramount governments that you're doing to fight climate change. If you can be able to expand how you are fighting climate change, helping fighting climate change, that you were recognized by the French industry, by the French community, for your role in that fight. And where do you strike a balance between profitability and being able to fight climate change as Paramount governments?
Yes, it is a very hard question, but it's an investment we've all got to make, and I think environmental policies need to be seen that they're an investment in the future. So will you always recover your costs from trying to do them? Very seldom is it possible to do that. For argument, we have a lot of waste naturally in clothing. When you cut around the fabric and cut all the pieces out to make a garment, you will have that waste. Now, is there any way we can use that? So we have looked into that. We have traditionally been selling that to, first of all, South Africa, with 3 or 4 companies down there where they will reutilize the waste to make blankets, pillows, stuffing, mattress stuffing, and things like that. Unfortunately, all those companies have disappeared, and there was an operation in Bulawayo for a while that was doing it, but they have also gone out of business. So our aim is now to try and do it ourselves, to take that waste and develop it into another product that can then be made available to people. It will not be on a full cost recovery basis, because as I said, it should be an investment in the future. Likewise with the solar power in this country, although we have a lot of hydroelectric power, which is relatively sustainable, we still burn a lot of coal, which is not environmentally sound and is not in the long term sustainable, no matter how big your coal reserves are. It also is an issue for our international customers, particularly in the first world, is when you utilize your energy from those sources, they see that as a black mark against you. So to go to an environmentally sensible one where the sun comes out every day in Africa, or just about every day, we can utilize that natural resource and turn it into power the majority of our factories. There is a cost recoverability on it. But again, as I said, it's more about the sustainability, that where we do have power outages in this country, the sun very seldom goes out. So we have a lot more ability to maintain our production and our efficiencies. On the wastewater, it is a shame that in most countries in the world we have reticulated water systems where we purify the water to a drinking standard, but then use that same water that is drinking standard to wash our dishes, flush our toilets, and showers. Now, if we can recycle some of that water, not for drinking water, but useful thing, we not only reduce our consumption of water, but we've used it again for a much better purpose. And it can be cleansed and used again and again and again. So again, there is probably not a direct cost recovery on that, and there is a conflict with profit, but it is an investment in the future in our own longevity and sustainability.
Wow, that's quite amazing for viewers out there to be able to realize that you can actually contribute in an environmentally friendly way and be able to produce electricity. How is that possible? And if you are able to produce some sort of electricity through the garment industry, the clothing industry, why, as Paramount Garments, are you not coming up with a strategy that you can be able to involve the powers that be, the public entities that deal with electricity, for example, so that you can be able to assist where it's possible?
Well, the national grid is serviced by ZESA. Now, to try with ZETPC really, but that grid is not something we can invest in. That's an enormous investment. But what we can do is create electricity, produce the electricity ourselves through solar energy, and then utilize that ourselves. To distribute it on a large scale to other players is not in the scale of what we can do.
Yes,
that's a national strategy.
Yes, of course.
But there are schemes, obviously, if we create a surplus electricity, that can go back into the grid, can be sold back into the grid, and everybody can enjoy a bit of that electricity. So the key is to have the power to be able to do it ourselves and utilize the natural resource, which is the sun, the greatest energy in this whole universe. Well, within our solar system, I should say. But we can utilize that to create our own electricity. And it's really about trying to retain our own reliability, where we don't have to worry about power outages, which do happen. We do have big generators at the factories which do fully run them, but they're diesel powered, obviously, and very expensive to run. So they can be a third backup when the solar power is not sufficient enough voltage to be able to drive it, or you've had during the rainy season a lot of cloud or whatever, and your power you're sustaining from the solar is not great enough. But as a strategy, it would, obviously the electricity we stop using from the grid is then available to everybody else. So as far as helping others, what it's actually doing is making the electricity we used to consume from the grid now goes to, you have less outages for everybody else. So it does have a compounding effect. The problem for ZETPC is obviously we won't be paying them much money.
Yes.
But that they need to get off other people. We need a reliable source of electricity.
Yes. So it actually shows that as Paramount Garments, you're going beyond production of the clothing industry itself. If you're able to produce power that sustains your own operations and you're producing it in the safest way, be that as it may, if you look in countries like South Africa, they have problems sometimes with Eskom, the one that runs their own electricity. Endless problems to date, problems that go for decades. So electricity is a problem, sometimes regionally, even though we take some of the electricity from Cabora Bassa in Mozambique in trying to balance our own grid. So I would say you are being innovative as Paramount Garments, and if you are able to secure clean, safe energy to produce this electricity so that you are able to remain in business constantly and always. I guess this explains why during the whole COVID pandemic, which has been 2 years plus, you've been able to continue operating, and you've been able to continue putting food on the tables of your employees. And not only that, it means they have also been able to give something back in return to the country. And as an essential service provider, you are the largest manufacturing firm in the country. There's no doubt about it. I'm sure you can agree with me that Paramount Garments is the largest manufacturing.
Clothing manufacturer.
Yes.
Yeah.
The largest in the country.
Yes.
What pressure does that put on you to continue being the largest, so that you are able to not only take care of your employees but remain in business and viable?
Well, I think there is a responsibility with being as large as we are. We're not large by world standards, but obviously we are in Zimbabwe, and I think we take on the role of leadership within the clothing industry as much as we can. It does create space for other clothing companies as well, because you create what they call a critical mass of development. For argument's sake, if Zimbabwe had only a couple of very small players who could only service the local industries, the international buyers would not bother looking at Zimbabwe. If you have one or two players who are able to export, they understand that, and then they look for, and then they can look at everybody within the market. As big companies as well, we tend to require large runs, because our companies, our production facilities are set up to need large teams of people working on garments. That opens up opportunities for smaller companies to develop, because the small runs are not attractive to a company like Paramount. So you actually create this demand that you don't want to service, and so we spend a lot of time allocating out those orders to small companies. We used to at one stage actually directly support 17 other companies working for us on those smaller orders that they can better be set up to do. It's not about trying to keep the more profitable ones or the little ones, but once you set up a line that has got, let's say, 40 workers in it, there is no point in putting in a garment that's only going to use 5, because you make the other 35 people inefficient. They have nothing to do. So it's about scales and different production sets. So I think there is a responsibility there, and we do see ourselves as needing to not only lead in the sector, but also in our own value chain. We're very passionate about developing the cotton to clothing value chain within Zimbabwe. That has become a national strategy, and we want to play our full part in that. At the clothing end of the chain, we're actually the largest value adder, if we can get it right up through the chain, the product. Zimbabwe has all the components, all the stages that are needed to develop a full cotton value. Very few countries have that, so we have an enormous opportunity. But we must find a way of linking all the stages together in an efficient way so that it works. At the moment it doesn't work, and we need to support all of the individual stages to do that. So on the industry, as you mentioned, I'm the chairman of the Zimbabwe Clothing Manufacturers Association. We have recently met where we also, as an association, want to rise up very quickly, represent our members better, communicate better, have a more, be more visible to everybody, and have more of an impact. We are already meeting with government departments for support measures that we need, and we would like to get back to the days where we used to hold those national endowments and involve, everybody in the cotton value chain, and show people what actually can be made here, what can be developed, and what can be done.
Yes, you mentioned earlier about the foreign currency allocations. You are the largest exporter in terms of clothing, since already you are also the largest manufacturer, and you have been bringing in a lot of foreign currency for the country, which has been benefiting them, because you're exporting and you're bringing in forex, which is also benefiting the Zimbabwean government, the country as a whole, and not just the business. Why then are we having problems with the foreign currency auction, which is supposed to allocate you enough forex for your running of the operations?
The concept of the surrender from the exporters was to be able to spread the foreign currency availability out amongst those players who weren't exporters, because obviously only exporters were having it. So the policy was put in place so that a fund could be set up to then distribute, and effectively the auction system is to do that, to make foreign currency available to players who don't earn it themselves. The problem with it is although the Reserve Bank came out with very clear guidelines on a priority basis of allocation, it is the banks who have a big say in that allocation, and the banks are interested in servicing all their customers, not just the ones who meet the criteria that were given, and that to us is one of the major weaknesses. There are lots of parties who are being allocated money who bring in finished product, or who aren't even manufacturers, and yet the manufacturers themselves are being starved with the funds. If we had a very successful textile industry that, as we used to have many years ago, it wouldn't be such an issue, but the clothing sector is reliant on imported raw materials, so it can value add them, be a major employer, and turn around and in a lot of cases then be able to export it and earn more foreign currency. But if you starve it of the raw material, it can't manufacture anything. So this is where the allocation things, and in my understanding, I think the fault there, the Reserve Bank did lay down the guidelines. It appears very clearly from the list those guidelines aren't being followed as strictly as they should. And although raw materials is the biggest allocation of the foreign currency funds, it's not being allocated enough to those that could drive the industrialization strategies of the country.
I think that is a very big talking point. We are going to return back shortly with you. We're just going to take a short break. We'll come back with the Paramount Garments Chief Finance Director, Mr. Jeremy Youmans, telling us more about what they are contributing to the fiscus. Mr. Jeremy, we're going to take a short break.
All right, thank you.
Welcome back to TechMake TV. Your host, I'm with Mr. Jeremy Youmans, the Chief Finance Director for Paramount Garments, Paramount Exports, which also owns Paramount&Archer in Bulawayo, Zimbabwe's biggest clothing manufacturing company. And actually, they have had multiple awards on being the largest exporter, starting from being the most improved exporter when it comes to manufacturing. Mr. Jeremy Youmans, welcome back to the second half of our interview.
Thanks, Ross.
Yes, when we left, we were talking about how the foreign currency auction has been allocating its resources. The fact of the matter is that raw materials are said to be receiving most of the allocation. If the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe says we have allocated $38 million, a big chunk of that goes to manufacturing. But now, why is it that as much as Paramount Garments is the largest manufacturing company, and we have seen that you have been coming short, what is your advice to the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe? If I'm not mistaken, at some stage you used to be one of the advisors. What is your take on that?
No, I wasn't ever one of the advisors to the Reserve Bank. There's some extremely intelligent people there who are good at doing their job. I'll stick to doing mine. But the advice is, I think that they need to control the allocation system through the banks. The banks are torn between following a guideline from the Reserve Bank and servicing all their customers' needs. And every company at some level needs the foreign currency. The problem is that we don't focus on the key drivers of our economy and the industrialization and export growth. Then the rest are going to suffer anyway. And there isn't enough foreign currency being generated formally, and that's another whole discussion point to be able to service everything, and that's why the priorities were crucial of how people, how they should be allocated. So really it is just a plea to the Reserve Bank that you're going to have to find a way to control this further and ensure there is more adherence to that priority system. They do rely on what they call a KYC with the banks, know your customer, that stands for, where the bank should not be allocating or applying for money to be allocated from people who do not meet the criteria. But clearly that's not happening efficiently enough. And it's not just about Paramount. Through our exports we do achieve some of our own foreign currency. And it's not enough, but there are other companies there that do not export but are servicing the local market. If they have to service that local market with imported fabric, how do they do that without getting allocated foreign currency? So under ZCMA, that is one of our biggest problems our members have, is this access to foreign currency.
Clothing is part of the cotton to clothing value chain. And how is this chain performing? What needs to be done to make it perform better?
An enormous amount of work needs to be done. No, it's not performing. There are, as I said earlier, that Zimbabwe is blessed to be able to have the ability to have all stages of the value chain here. If you take a country like Mauritius, very efficient in clothing and textile, but they just don't have the land space to grow cotton. So they will never have that stage of it. And it's not just, therefore, if you're not growing the cotton, you do not also get the cotton seed, which can be expressed to make cooking oil, and also animal feed. So there's a lovely part of the chain that they can't get. In Zimbabwe, we can have all of those stages, and we can value add everything here. But we have to make it work, and it has become fragmented, would be the best term, and with all of the stages operating independently. So we need to build the linkages between those stages to do it. So there is an association we set up about 6 years ago, called the Association of Cotton Value Adders, which has representation on its board by a senior manager from each of the stages and all the other stakeholders, including government, to be able to administer this. Unfortunately, it is totally under-resourced and therefore is totally handcuffed in how it can perform its duties and go out and do things. So it's relying on people to voluntarily turn up and put their ideas, which worked for a while, but it's fallen over. So we need to capitalize that, get it going again properly. The aim is to bring in the private sector as a key player driving all this, but you've got to often put your first step forward and then build the confidence for people to come and support you. So it needs that kickstart, and that's why one of our key strategies at the moment is to find funding for it. It will not be eternal funding, it will be simply a kickstart funding, which can then be picked up once you've built the credibility. There are a lot of quick wins that can be done. The clothing and textile sectors have already signed an agreement each that has got very good synergy to enable the full utilization of fabric that is made available to the local market. And we can build on coming further down from that. The linkages between the ginners and the spinners, making sure enough cotton lint is made available for them to be able to spin into yarn. And then backwards into producing our own cooking oil. We spend hundreds of millions of dollars every year importing cooking oil, rather than growing soya beans and cottonseed, where we can express enough oil to meet the whole national demand, if the crop is big enough. So we also have to support the farmers to get the crop big enough. It's been a contentious issue for many, many years on why we can't produce this crop as efficiently as we used to, and to the quality of the cotton that we need. And that's where a lot of work needs to be done. People have been working suboptimally in their own, in their own interests. And so this is the power of ACFAS as a legal recognized association that's registered with the Ministry of Labour, that can then put all our heads together and honestly work together to be able to develop the chain. And it will take time, not everything can be done at one time. But the farmers, the yields on the farms are just simply not good enough. But that's not to say that we need to blame the farmers. If they don't get the correct inputs, if they don't have the other support they can't possibly produce an efficient crop. If they don't produce an efficient crop, cotton becomes a disaster, they don't want to grow it anymore. So we're going to build the credibility in the crop as well through making sure the farmer gets every resource they need, including training. Because as I mentioned earlier, that even we as a very long-serving company have brought in some expertise from the rest of the world to show us how maybe we've slipped somewhere, or we're not up with the latest practice. So it's very important to give that benefit to our farmers as well, but that has to be paid for. We have to find a way of financing it.